Okay. I would like to welcome anyone who is watching this on the video, either now or later, and say that we're we're approaching the end of our reading of Dubliners, but we have two stories to go. And the story that we will primarily focus on today is called A Mother. Um, and then a reminder, anybody wants to read with us, either following us on the video or um, joining us. We will be going to Under Milkwood after we finish our two Dubliner stories. And then we will be going and reading Joyce's brother's book by Stanislaus Joyce. That's
I'm
what the
having a
plan.
hard time getting that.
Oh, can you read online? Can
Can I
I
read
teach
on
you? Can I teach? Because I can teach you how to have a split
split
screen
screen?
and
May
have.
have to do that. Um, Thrift Books has it, but I think they're selling it for $25 or something. I'm
Yeah.
still waiting for my library supposed to be getting it for me, but so far I haven't seen it.
Okay. Okay. Well,
Let's
let me
wait.
know. To
I'll
tell you
let
the
you.
truth, when I'm reading something online, you
Mhm.
don't even have to do it split screen. You can just have the text online.
Yeah,
Uh, the from the other Zoom participants, you will
yeah,
look like you're just online.
yeah. Okay.
Okay. But you'll have the full screen to read from. And I find that the easiest way for me to
That would be
read
best.
is
Yeah,
when I have a full screen. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. That's good. We'll get it worked out. And if you need me to give you some instructions on how to do that, I'll
I
be
know
more
I
than
was the
happy.
one who suggested Under Milkwood. I took a look at it the other day,
Hmm.
Duncan. That's gonna be kind of hard to do. You're up to it, okay? Glad to hear it.
Everybody agreed to this one, so
Yeah,
I think we'll get it figured out, you know.
okay,
And
good.
nothing is stamped in wood if for some reason it turned out to be really hard. I mean, we can always say, well, that was an interesting experiment. Let's go on to.
Oh, it's a
So
wonderful play. Mhm.
I rarely nail my foot to the ground on anything. And I'm always up for trying stuff. All right. Well, all that being said, we will proceed with the Dubliner story, A Mother. A Mother. Mr. Holohan, Assistant Secretary of the Area Abu Society, had been walking up and down Dublin for nearly a month, with his hands and pockets full of dirty pieces of paper arranging about the series of concerts. He had a game leg, and for this his friends called him Hoppy, Hoppy Holohan. He walked up and down constantly, stood by the hour at street corners arguing the point, and made notes. But in the end, it was Mrs. Kearney who arranged everything. Mrs. Devlin had become Mrs. Kearney out of spite. She had been educated in a high-class convent where she had learned French and music. As she was naturally pale and unbending in manner, she made few friends at school. When she came to the age of marriage, she was sent out to many houses where her plain and ivory manners were much admired. She, she sat amid the chilly circle of her accomplishments, waiting for some suitor to brave it and offer her a brilliant life. But the young men whom she met were ordinary, and she gave them no encouragement, trying to console her romantic desires by eating a great deal of Turkish delight in secret. However, when she drew near the limit and her friends began to loosen their tongues about her, she silenced them by marrying Mr. Kearney, who was a bootmaker on Ormond Quay. Next reader.
He was much older than she. His conversation, which was serious, took place at intervals in his great brown beard. After the first year of married life, Mrs. Kearney perceived that such a man would wear better than a romantic person, but she never put her own romantic ideas away. He was sober, thrifty, and pious. He went to the altar every first Friday, and sometimes with her, oftener by himself. But she never weakened in her religion and was a good wife to him. At some party in the strange house, when she lifted her eyebrow ever so slightly, he stood up to take his leave, and when his cough troubled him, she put the eider-down quilt over his feet and made a strong rum punch. For his part, he was a model father. By paying a small sum each week into a society, he ensured for both his daughters a dowry of £100 each when they came to age of 24. He sent the elder daughter, Kathleen, to a good convent where she learned French and music and afterwards paid her fees at the academy. Every year in the month of July, Mrs. Kearney found occasion to say to some friend, "My good man is packing us off to Skerries for a few weeks." Next, please.
If it was not Skerries, it was Holt or Greystones. When the Irish revival began to be appreciable, Mrs. Kearney determined to take advantage of her daughter's name and brought an Irish teacher to the house. Kathleen and her sister sent Irish picture postcards to their friends, and these friends sent back other Irish picture postcards. On special Sundays, when Mr. Kearney went with his family to the Pro Cathedral, a little crowd of people would assemble after Mass at the corner of Cathedral Street. They're all friends of the Kearneys, musical friends or nationalist friends, and when they had played every little counter of gossip, they shook hands with one another all together, laughing at the crossing of so many hands, and said goodbye to one another in Irish. Soon, the name of Miss Kathleen Kearney began to be heard often on people's lips. People said that she was very clever at music and a very nice girl, and moreover, that she was a believer in the language movement. Mrs. Kearney was well content at this. Therefore, she was not surprised when one day Mr. Holohan came to her and proposed that her daughter should be the accompanist at a series of 4 grand concerts which his society was going to give in the Antient concert rooms. She brought him into the drawing room, made him sit down, and brought out the decanter and the silver biscuit barrel. She entered heart and soul into the details of the enterprise, advised and dissuaded, and finally, a contract was drawn up by which Kathleen was to receive 8 guineas for her services as accompanist at the 4 grand concerts.
Okay. As Mr. Houlihan was a novice in such delicate matters as the wording of bills and the disposing of items for a programme, Mrs. Kearney helped him. She had tact. She knew what artists should go into capitals and what artists should go into small town. She knew that the first tenor would not like to come on after Mr. Meade's comic run. To keep the audience continually diverted, she slipped the doubtful items in between the old favourites. Mr. Houlihan called to see her every other day to have her advice on some point. She was invariably friendly and advising, homely in fact. She pushed the decanter towards him, saying, "Now help yourself, Mr. Houlihan." And while he was helping himself, she said, don't be afraid of it. Everything went on smoothly. Mrs. Kearney bought some lovely bluish-pink charmeuse in Brown Thomas's to let into the front of Kathleen's dress. It cost a pretty penny, but there are occasions when a little expense is justifiable. She took a dozen of 2-shilling tickets for the final concert and sent them to those friends who could not be trusted to come otherwise. She forgot nothing, and thanks to her, everything that was to be done was done. Next, please.
The concerts were to be on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. When Mrs. Carney arrived with her daughter at the 18 concert rooms on Wednesday night, she did not like the look of things. A few young men wearing bright blue badges on their coats stood idle in the vestibule. None of them wore evening dress. She passed by with her daughter, and a quick glance through the open door of the hall showed her the cause of the steward's idleness. At first she wondered, had she mistaken the hour? No, it was 20 minutes to 8. In the dressing room behind the stage, she was introduced to the secretary of the society, Mr. Fitzpatrick. She smiled and shook his hand. He was a little man with a white, vacant face. She noticed that he wore his soft brown hat carelessly on the side of his head, and that his accent was flat. He held a programme in his hand, and while he was talking to her, he chewed one end of it into a moist pulp. He seemed to bear disappointments lightly. Mr. Holohan came into the dressing room every few minutes with reports from the box office. The artistes talked among themselves nervously, glancing from time to time at the mirror, and rolled and unrolled their music. When it was nearly 8:30, the few people in the hall began to express their desire to be entertained. Mr. Fitzpatrick came in, smiled vacantly at the room, and said, "Well now, ladies and gentlemen, I suppose we'd better open the ball. Next."
Mrs. Carney rewarded his very flat final syllable with a quick stare of contempt, and then said to her daughter encouragingly, "Are you ready, dear?" When she had an opportunity, she called Mr. Holohan aside and asked him to tell her what it meant. Mr. Holohan did not know what it meant. He said that the committee had made a mistake in arranging for 4 concerts. 4 was too many. And the artists, said Mrs. Carney, "Of course they are doing their best, but really they are no good." Mr. Holohan admitted that the artists were no good, but the committee, he said, had decided to let the first 3 concerts go as they pleased and reserved all the talent for Saturday night. Mrs. Carney said nothing, but as mediocre items followed one another on the platform, and the few people in the hall grew fewer and fewer, she began to regret that she had put herself to any expense for such a concert. There was something she didn't like in the look of things, and Mr. Fitzpatrick's vacant smile irritated her very much. However, she said nothing and waited to see how it would end. The concert expired shortly before 10, and everyone went home quickly. Next.
The concert on Thursday night was better attended, but Mrs. Kearney saw at once that the house was filled with paper. The audience behaved indecorously, as if the concert were an informal dress rehearsal. Mr. Fitzpatrick seemed to enjoy himself. He was quite unconscious that Mrs. Kearney was taking angry note of his conduct. He stood at the edge of the screen from time to time, jutting out his head and exchanging a laugh with 2 friends in the corner of the balcony. In the course of the evening, Mrs. Kearney learned that the Friday concert was to be abandoned, and that the committee was going to move heaven and earth to secure a bumper house on Saturday night. When she heard this, she sought out Mr. Holohan. She buttonholed him as he was limping out quietly with a glass of lemonade for a young lady, and asked him, was it true? Yes, it was true. But of course, that doesn't alter the contract, she said. The contract was for 4 concerts. Next, please.
Mr. Holohan seemed to be in a hurry. He advised her to speak with Mr. Fitzpatrick. Mrs. Kearney was now beginning to be alarmed. She called Mr. Fitzpatrick away from his screen and told him that her daughter had signed for 4 concerts, and that, of course, according to the terms of the contract, she should receive the sum originally stipulated for, whether the society gave the 4 concerts or not. Mr. Fitzpatrick, who did not catch the point at issue very quickly, seemed unable to resolve the difficulty, and said that he would bring the matter before the committee. Mrs. Kearney's anger began to flutter in her cheek, and she had all she could do to keep from asking, And who is the committee, pray? But she knew it would not be ladylike to do that, so she was silent. Next, please.
Little boys were sent out into the principal street of Dublin early on Friday morning with bundles of handbills. Special puffs appeared in all the evening papers, reminding the music-loving public of the treat which was in store for it on the following evening. Mrs. Kearney was somewhat reassured, but she thought well to tell her husband part of her suspicions. He listened carefully and said that perhaps it would be better if he went with her on Saturday night. She agreed. She respected her husband in the same way she respected the General Post Office as something large, secure, and fixed. And though she knew the small number of his talents, she appreciated his abstract value as a male. She was glad that he had suggested coming with her. She thought her plans over. The night of the grand concert came. Mrs. Kearney, with her husband and daughter, arrived at the Antient concert rooms 3/4 of an hour before the time at which the concert was to begin. By ill luck, it was a rainy evening. Mrs. Kearney placed her daughter's clothes and music in charge of her husband and went all over the building looking for Mr. Holohan or Mr. Fitzpatrick. She could find neither. She asked the stewards if any member of the committee in the hall, if any of them was any member of the committee in the hall, and after a great deal of trouble, the steward brought out a little woman named Miss Byrne, to whom Mrs. Kearney explained that she wanted to see one of the secretaries. Miss Byrne expected them any minute and asked could she do anything. Mrs. Kearney looked searchingly at the oldish face, which was screwed into an expression of trustfulness and enthusiasm, and answered, "No, thank you." Next, please.
The little woman hoped that they would have a good house. She looked out at the rain until the melancholy of the wet street effaced all the trustfulness and enthusiasm from her twisted features. Then she gave a little sigh and said, "Ah, well, we did our best, the dear knows." Mrs. Kearney had to go back to the dressing room. The artistes were arriving. The bass and the second tenor had already come. The bass, Mr. Duggan, was a slender man with a scattered black moustache. He was the son of a hall porter in an office in the city, and as a boy, he had sung prolonged bass notes in the resounding hall. From this humble state, he had raised himself until he had become a first-rate artiste. He had appeared in grand opera. One night, when an operatic artist had fallen ill, he had undertaken the part of the king in the opera of Maritana at the Queen's Theatre. He sang his music with great feeling and volume and was warmly welcomed by the gallery. But unfortunately, he marred the good impression by wiping his nose in his gloved hand once or twice out of thoughtlessness. He was unassuming and spoke little. He said "yous" so softly that it passed unnoticed, and he never drank anything stronger than milk for his voice's sake. Mr. Bell, the second tenor, was a fair-haired little man who competed every year for prizes at the Peshkol. On his fourth trial, he had been awarded a bronze medal. He was extremely nervous and extremely jealous of other tenors, and he covered his nervous jealousy with an ebullient friendliness. It was his humor to have people know what an ordeal a concert was to him. Therefore, when he saw Mr. Duggan, he went over to him and asked, "Are you in it too?" "Yes," said Mr. Duggan. Mr. Bell laughed at his fellow sufferer, held out his hand and said, "Shake." Next, please. Anne.
Okay. Mrs. Kearney passed by these two young men and went to the edge of the screen to view the house. The seats were being filled up rapidly, and a pleasant noise circulated in the auditorium. She came back and spoke to her husband privately. Their conversation was evidently about Kathleen, for they both glanced at her often as she stood chatting to one of her nationalist friends, Miss Healy, the contralto. An unknown solitary woman with a pale face walked through the room. The women followed with keen eyes the faded blue dress which was stretched upon a meagre body. Someone said that she was Madame Glynn, the soprano. I wonder where did they dig her up, said Kathleen to Miss Healy. I'm sure I never heard of her. Miss Healy had to smile. Mr. Houlihan limped into the dressing room at that moment, and the two young ladies asked him who was the unknown woman. Mr. Houlihan said that she was Madame Glynn from London. Madame Glynn took her stand in a corner of the room, holding a roll of music stiffly before her, and from time to time changing the direction of her startled gaze. The shadow took her faded dress into shelter, but fell revengefully into the little cup behind her collarbone. The noise of the hall became more audible. The first tenor and the baritone arrived together. They were both well dressed, stout and complacent, and they brought a breath of opulence among the company. Next, please.
Mrs. Carney brought her daughter over to them and talked to them amiably. She wanted to be on good terms with them, but while she strove to be polite, her eyes followed Mr. Houlihan in his limping and devious courses. As soon as she could, she excused herself and went out after him. Mr. Houlihan, I want to speak to you for a moment, she said. They went down to a discreet part of the corridor. Mrs. Carney asked him, when was her daughter going to be paid? Mr. Houlihan said that Mr. Fitzpatrick had charge of that. Mrs. Carney said that she didn't know anything about Mr. Fitzpatrick. Her daughter had signed a contract for 8 guineas and she would have to be paid. Mr. Houlihan said that it wasn't his business. Why isn't it your business? Asked Mrs. Carney. Didn't you yourself bring her the contract? Anyway, if it's not your business, it's my business and I mean to see to it. You better speak to Mr. Fitzpatrick, said Mr. Houlihan distantly. I don't know anything about Mr. Fitzpatrick, repeated Mrs. Carney. I have my contract and I intend to see that it's carried out. When she came back to the dressing room, her cheeks were slightly suffused. The room was lively. 2 men in outdoor dress had taken possession of the fireplace and were chatting familiarly with Miss Healy and the baritone. Next.
They were the Freeman man and Mr. O'Madden Burke. The Freeman man had come in to say that he could not wait for the concert as he had to report the lecture which an American priest was giving in the Mansion House. He said they were to leave the report for him at the Freeman office and he would see that it went in. He was a gray-haired man with a plausible voice and a careful manner. He had an extinguished cigar in his hand, and the aroma of cigar smoke floated near him. He had not intended to stay a moment because concerts and artistes bored him considerably, but he remained leaning against the mantelpiece. Miss Healy stood in front of him, talking and laughing. He was old enough to suspect one reason for her politeness, but young enough in spirit to turn the moment to account. The warmth, fragrance, and color of her body appealed to his senses. He was pleasantly conscious that the bosom which he saw rise and fall slowly beneath him rose and fell at that moment for him, that the laughter and fragrance and willful glances were his tribute. When he could stay no longer, he took leave of her regretfully. Oh, Madame Burke will write the notice, he explained to Mr. Houlihan, and I'll see it in. Thank you very much, Mr. Hendrick, said Mr. Houlihan. You'll see it in, I know. Now, won't you have a little something before you go? I don't mind, said Mr. Hendrick. Next.
The 2 men went along some tortuous passages and up a dark staircase and came to a secluded room where one of the stewards was uncorking bottles for a few gentlemen. One of these gentlemen was Mr. O'Rourke Burke, who had found the room by instinct. He was a suave, elderly man who balanced his imposing body when at rest upon a large silk umbrella. His magnificent Western name was the moral umbrella upon which he balanced the fine problem of his finances. He was wildly respected. While Mr. Holohan was entertaining the Freeman man, Mrs. Kearney was speaking so animatedly to her husband that he had to ask her to lower her voice. The conversation of the others in the dressing room had become strained. Mr. Bell, the first item, stood ready with his music, but the accompanist made no sign. Evidently, something was wrong. Mr. Kearney looked straight before him, stroking his beard, while Mrs. Kearney spoke into Kathleen's ear with subdued emphasis. From the hall came sounds of encouragement, clapping and stamping of feet. The first tenor and the baritone and Miss Healy stood together, waiting tranquilly, but Mr. Bell's nerves were greatly agitated because he was afraid the audience would think that he had come late. Next, please.
Mr. Holohan and Mr. O'Madden Burke came into the room. In a moment, Mr. Holohan perceived the hush. He went over to Mrs. Kearney and spoke with her earnestly. While they were speaking, the noise in the hall grew louder. Mr. Holohan became very red and excited. He spoke volubly, but Mrs. Kearney said curtly at intervals, "She won't go on. She must get her 8 guineas." Mr. Holohan pointed desperately towards the hall where the audience was clapping and stamping. He appealed to Mr. Kearney, and to Kathleen. But Mr. Kearney continued to stroke his beard, and Kathleen looked down, moving the point of her new shoe. It was not her fault. Mrs. Kearney repeated, "She won't go on without her money." Next, please.
Joe, do you want to take it? Because I'm lost.
After a swift struggle of tongues, Mr. Holohan hobbled out in haste. The room was silent. When the strain of the silence had become somewhat painful, Miss Healy said to the baritone, "Have you seen Mrs. Pat Campbell this week?" The baritone had not seen her, but he had been told that she was very fine. Conversation went no further. The first tenor bent his head and began to count the links of the gold chain which was extended across his waist, smiling and humming random notes to observe the effect on the frontal thymus. From time to time, everyone glanced at Mrs. Kearney. The noise in the auditorium had risen to a clamour when Mr. Fitzpatrick burst into the room, followed by Mr. Holohan, who was panting. The clapping and stamping in the hall were punctuated by whistling. Mr. Fitzpatrick held a few banknotes in his hand. He counted out 4 into Mrs. Kearney's hand and said she would get the other half at the interval. Mrs. Kearney said, "This is 4 shillings short." Kathleen gathered in her skirt and said, "Now, Mr. Bell," to the first item, who was shaking like an aspen. The singer and the accompanist went out together. The noise in the hall had died away. There was a pause of a few seconds, and then the piano was heard. And
Did you find your place, Katrina, or will I go?
Go ahead. I
Did you-
found it, but go ahead.
No, you're fine. I'd go after you.
Okay.
The first
Okay,
part of the
So
concert.
we're the first part. Okay. The first part of the concert was very successful, except for Madam Glynn's item. The poor lady sang Killarney in a bodiless, gasping voice with all the old-fashioned mannerisms of intonation and pronunciation which she believed lent elegance to her singing. She looked as if she had been resurrected from an old stage wardrobe, and the cheaper part of the hall made fun of her high wailing notes. The first tenor and the contralto, however, brought down the house. Kathleen played a selection of Irish airs, which was generously applauded. The first part closed with a stirring patriotic recitation delivered by a young lady who arranged amateur theatricals. It was deservedly applauded, and when it was ended, the men went out for the interval, content. Anne.
Okay. All this time, the dressing room was a hive of excitement. In one corner were Mr. Houlihan, Mr. Fitzpatrick, Miss Byrne, two of the stewards, the baritone, the bass, and Mr. O'Madden Burke. Mr. O'Madden Burke said it was the most scandalous exhibition he had ever witnessed. Miss Kathleen Carney's musical career was ended in Dublin after that, he said. The baritone was asked what did he think of Mrs. Carney's conduct. He did not like to say anything. He had been paid his money and wished to be at peace with men. However, he said that Mrs. Carney might have taken the artiste into consideration. The stewards and the secretaries debated hotly as to what should be done when the interval came. I agree with Miss Byrne, said Mr. O'Madden Burke. Pay her nothing. In another corner of the room were Mrs. Carney and her husband, Mr. Bell, Miss Healy, and the young lady who had to recite the patriotic piece. Mrs. Carney said that the committee had treated her scandalously. She had spared neither trouble nor expense, and this was how she was repaid. Okay, there's Tom. No, is it? Yeah, Tom next.
They thought they had only a girl to deal with, and that therefore they could ride roughshod over her. But she would show them their mistake. They wouldn't have dared to have treated her like that if she had been a man. But she would see that her daughter got her rights. She wouldn't be fooled. If they didn't pay her to the last farthing, she would make Dublin ring. Of course, she was sorry for the sake of the artists, but what else could she do? She appealed to the second tenor, who said he thought she had not been well treated. Then she appealed to Miss Healy. Miss Healy wanted to join the other group, but she did not like to do so because she was a great friend of Kathleen's. The Carneys had often invited her to their house. As soon as the first part was ended, Mr. Fitzpatrick and Mr. Houlihan went over to Mrs. Carney and told her that the other 4 guineas would be paid after the committee meeting on the following Tuesday, and that, in case her daughter did not play for the second part, the committee would consider the contract broken and would pay nothing. I haven't seen any committee, said Mrs. Carney angrily. My daughter has her contract. She will get £4.8 into her hand, or a foot she won't put on the platform. I'm surprised at you, Mrs. Carney, said Mr. Houlihan. I never thought you would treat us this way. And what way did you treat me? Asked Mrs. Carney. Next.
Her face was inundated with an angry color, and she looked as if she would attack someone with her hands. I'm asking for my rights, she said. You might have had some sense of decency, said Mr. Houlihan. Might I indeed? And when I ask when my daughter is going to be paid, I can't get a civil answer. She tossed her head and assumed a haughty voice. You must speak to the secretary. It's not my business. I'm a great fellow, fault did I do. I thought you were a lady, said Mr. Houlihan, walking away from her abruptly. After that, Mrs. Carney's conduct was condemned on all hands. Everyone approved of what the committee had done. She stood at the door, haggard with rage, arguing with her husband and daughter, gesticulating with them. She waited until it was time for the second part to begin, in the hope that the secretaries would approach her. But Miss Healy had kindly consented to play 1 or 2 accompaniments. Mrs. Carney had to stand aside and allow the baritone and his accompanist to pass up to the platform. She stood still for an instant like an angry stone image, and when the first notes of the song struck her ear, she caught up her daughter's cloak and said to her husband, "Get a cab." He went out at once. Mrs. Carney wrapped the cloak round her daughter and followed him. As she passed through the doorway, she stopped and glared into Mr. Houlihan's face. I'm not done with you yet, she said. But I'm done with you, said Mr. Houlihan. Kathleen followed her mother meekly. Mr. Houlihan began to pace up and down the room in order to cool himself for he felt his skin on fire. That's a nice lady, she said. Oh, she's a nice lady. You did the proper thing, Houlihan, said Mr. O'Madden Burke, poised upon his umbrella in approval.
Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
This is, my God, what a dissection. A dissection of whew. So, does anybody know of Joyce besides writing the story? Know what Joyce has added to? Did he say anything special about this particular story?
Yeah. Well, it happened to him, you see. This is exactly what happened to Joyce in his concert. I think it was in August 1904.
Yeah.
And he was there along with McCormick and several others.
Mhm.
And when it was his turn to come on, the accompanists had left the stage, and he actually had to go over to the piano himself and improvise and sing a different song that was on the program. So it's kind of he's really writing about something that he experienced himself as regards the details, but then he's taking a swipe at a lot of other things as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah. And he said he wrote to Stanislaus to ask him, he said, what do you think of this story? And Stanislaus said, well, he said, I don't like the title. It would be a better title for a painting, you know. But he said, but you've done it in with your usual malicious accuracy. You know, that's where Stanislaus were. No. Anyway, yeah.
It's amazing that he was so sympathetic. I mean, he does describe, he's pitiless in his description of the mother, but he's also sympathetic to the
I think so,
situation.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, this is really a dissection of small politics.
Yeah.
I would like to see a copy of the contract, please.
The point is there is no contract because the man who prepared it, the sub-secretary, has no power to bind any group in law. So there you go. If it wasn't prepared by the officers of the group, it would be thrown out of court. It'd be laughed out of court. He's only the sub-secretary. He's not the secretary.
Mm.
So it's not worth the air it's written on.
Mm.
And they know it.
From the beginning.
Well, I'd say Holohan doesn't. I'd say Holohan's a gobshite. You know, he's happy. You know,
Yeah, he's just a goofball.
But yeah, he's a goof. But I'd say I can't remember their names. The boy with the umbrella. They know the way to. You know, they know where and they're making a fair offer to her. You know, she's going to get the bulk of her money. You know, so it's a mere social arrangement. It's like me suing you for not showing up to go to the pictures with me like we agreed. You know, social arrangement, not a leg to stand on. But can I continue, Tom, with the Joyce story?
Yeah, do. Yeah, exactly.
Look at what's his name, the second tenor. Mr. Bell was a fair little man who competed every year at the Feis Ceoil.
Yeah.
Extremely nervous and extremely jealous of other tenors. Joyce is describing himself. And he on the fourth trial he'd been awarded a bronze medal.
Yes.
And
yes.
Here we go, bronze by gold. When he goes to talk about music, his first word is bronze in Ulysses, bronze by gold. Because let me just I've got it in Elma. I just want to make sure I get my facts right. You know, sometimes imagination takes over. I've lost a bloody place. Well, between the jigs and yeah, here we go. There's a long description of the concert and what happens. And first prize was gold and second prize was bronze. And Joyce came third, so he got nothing. And but then the second place winner was disqualified because you were not allowed to win twice at this contest.
Ah,
It's a song contest. Ceol is Irish for music. It's just a celebration of music. So he was not entitled to a prize. It was therefore awarded the bronze medal to Mr. Joyce.
oh my God.
And he tried to pawn it.
Oh, James Joyce tried to pawn it.
Yeah, he had no interest in it. He was disgusted with it. And his aunt, his favorite aunt, Josie, who's got the house, as it were, what's the name she gets? This is Josephine. Of all the Joyce people, if you could get to travel back in time and talk to one, it's Aunt Josie. I would love to. His favorite aunt. And he tossed it onto Josephine Murray's lap, saying, "You can have it, Aunt Josephine. I have no use for it."
Yeah. Well, it was a little upsetting, I would think, a little insulting.
Well,
to only get a prize because the other person was disqualified.
yeah, but this happens to athletes all the time. That in the Olympics, some guy 10 years later is disqualified for drugs, and you get the bronze medal.
Right.
You don't throw it at your Aunt Josie. And I think that was 1903 when that happened. So he's written himself in there as Mr. Bell, the nervous, who gets increasingly nervous as the night goes on.
And going back to what Duncan said about Joyce being sympathetic to Mrs. Carney, Mr. Bell is the only person in the story who says to Mrs. Carney, I think you've been treated very badly. And he stays on her side. Yeah.
I hadn't spotted that. That's great.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Bronze by gold. You see? He's still sore about the bronze. When he comes to write essays about music, the first word he says is bronze. So there we go. And you notice Mrs. Carney's maiden name
Devil
contains all the letters of the word devil. Joyce plays with names the whole time, so she's a bit of a devil. She's a lot of devil in her.
Well, this reminds me though of the suffragettes at that particular time, who resorted to very violent, very outrageous techniques because they knew that being polite would just absolutely not do any good.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, that's the one that really comes to my mind is what was it at one of the horse races when they literally women suffragettes ran out into the field and grabbed the horses, tried to grab the horses by their reins.
What was her name? That lady?
I can't think of her now. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was the Epsom Derby. Yeah.
Epsom, yeah.
Yeah, the big race. Yeah.
Right, and that was maybe she was injured. At least it was an extremely.
No, she was killed. She was killed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when the was it the British Prime Minister came to Dublin, and Redmond, the Irish nationalist politician, was with him, and two suffragettes from England came with a hatchet head and threw it into the car, hit the Irish politician, not the British Prime Minister. It was a hatchet head,
That's pretty serious.
I presume it was an open carriage with a horse. I don't know, But they were. So, and of course, they're all the ones that were backing Joyce then a few years later.
Yes.
What was the magazine called? The free one. free woman becomes the new free woman becomes the egoist. Publishers, says.
So this is hopefully not too nebulous of a question, but I mean, Mrs. Kearney and her contract and all of that, I mean, this seems like something that she heard about that business people do. They have contracts and all this sort of thing. And she really didn't know what she was doing in spite of all of her other real talents for organization, etc. But
Yeah.
she really thought that was the way things worked.
Yeah,
Well, I have to ask the question, is she correct in her analysis that they wouldn't have done this to a man?
probably right.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But the baritone had been paid. He says
Yeah.
that in one part. The baritone was asked what he
Point.
think.
Good point. Yeah.
He had been paid his money and wished to be at peace with men.
Yep.
It's a
Mhm.
point to note.
It's a very good point that, the more you look at it, the more Mr. Bell is right to agree with her. You see?
Well, the other thing that gets me is not only did they welch, if that's not a racist word, they strung her along. They just strung her along week after week, concert after concert. So they were not forthcoming at all about this issue of what she was going to get paid. Or if.
Well, the concert it's not over weeks, isn't it? Forgive me now, I may be wrong. I thought it was in 1 week, and it was okay Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then they decided they'd cancel one because
right. But she hadn't received anything for any of those 3 days.
I know, well, you get it at the end, But
I thought there was only 4 concerts total.
It was supposed to be, and they canceled one.
It was 4.
It was supposed to be originally. It's going to be Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, or something like that.
Yeah, and one of them drops out. I can't remember which one, but one drops out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, of course, Joyce himself had this problem with the play he put on in Zurich as well.
Mm-hmm.
The Turner Shaw play, there was Mrs. What's Not Profession, Do you remember that, Tom?
Yeah, well, he did.
Private car, and they ended up in court. I think it ended up with 2.
About a pair of trousers, I think. Yeah.
Over a pair of trousers. Yeah. It was over the rate at which the actors would be paid. The professional actors were paid X, and the amateur actors were paid Y. But Private Car, whose name you will remember from Ulysses as well, because that's one of the drunk soldiers down with the prostitutes. Private Car, who's a war injury, and he's working in the consulate in Zurich, and he's also an amateur actor, and he carries the whole show. He's a good actor, and it all depends on him. He then goes out and spends money to get the right sort of trousers and things and clothing. Yeah. And when he presents his bill, Joyce only gives up the amateur rate, and you can forget about your expenses. And this escalates. It escalates, brings the British political establishment in Zurich on top of him. He gets invited to make a contribution to the war effort, and there was to volunteer for the war, and all sorts of things. At the same time, he's becoming friends with one of their staff called Frank Budgeon. They're going walking every day. But Carr, anyway, called him by names within the hearing of others, and Joyce brought an action for defamation against him. So there you go. And my understanding is that those cases were never settled, and they still remain on the books in Zurich. Because the war ended, Carr went home, and Joyce went back to Trieste and on to Paris. It's like this guy he's writing from personal experience. Well, this is before the event, but he's kind of he's at ease with the topic. I would say he doesn't have to research it. Would anyone like to see the ancient rooms? Just out of Duncan? Would that be permissible? Would I be allowed to?
Sure. Oh yeah. Let me go ahead and do.
Sometimes that's nice just to see because they're still there.
Let's see what do I have. Oh yeah, I have to make you, if I remember correctly, I make you a
there to allow sharing. There's
I
Dave.
think what I'll do is I will make you a host.
I know, just share him. Because I'll probably destroy
Share
it.
screen. You sure? I thought we tried that
Share
last
screen.
time.
I know, just share screen. Here we go. Yeah, that's it. And now I click the magic button and I go to somewhere else. I'm seeing your screen.
Yes, you are. That's because I think last time I had to give you some sort of permission.
Yeah, you just unshare so I can get back at mine. And there should be a button just to don't worry if it's too much hassle.
It's easy. I just make you host and then you click the share button on your screen and you do what you want.
Okay, well let's.
And while you're doing that, I will just say hi, Dave.
Hi.
Did you have a problem with the time change, Dave?
No, I didn't. We've just had family visiting.
Oh, okay.
There we go. Here's a screen share. There we
go. That's nice.
That's present. It's present appearance. Do you want to see the street it's in, the road it's in? It's Pierce Street. So you turn right there, you'd come to Swinney's.
Okay.
Oh, really?
Railway station. You go into the railway bridge. Sure, we can do it.
Okay.
We can do it.
You can move down there.
The magic of what's it called? Zoom or Maps or whatever the bloody thing I'm on. Where I've gone too far now, as usual. Man went too far. I'll go back to it. I swear I just want to see up there.
Okay.
Ooh, and there we are. And there we are where Bloom goes in to collect his letter. We did in there. That's the place. Now the offbeat nut company, appropriately enough. And then that'd be the church, St. Andrew's, where he goes in and sees all the girls in red halters. And if you stroll on up, you come to Swinney's. There's Swinney's there.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And there's PJ.
I recognize the doorway.
There's PJ.
Yeah.
That's PJ when he was young, pushing the go-kart. And there's Connor's Pub, now known as something else. What's it called, Tom? Kennedy's.
Kennedy's, yeah.
So anyway, but you see how close all this is. It's all in the neighborhood. And if we were to go the other direction, which I won't, I'll just unshare, get back to civilization. But if you go the other way, the other direction, you come to O'Connell Street. It's all a very small area. Like in courtesy of Google Maps, you could work out how long it takes to walk.
That's true.
There's Donna.
Hi, Joe. Hi, everybody.
Hello, Donna. So we just finished reading.
Hey, Duncan.
We finished reading A Mother, and we've been discussing that. And Joe was giving us a tour of the area. So I think, at least from my point of view, the possibility is that, well, the contract, which wasn't really a contract, would have been okay if the concerts had been a success and they had gathered a bunch of money. So this is really one of those stories of what happens when the pressure's on.
Yeah.
When there's money due that was not gathered together, it's a complete failure, money wise, and yet Mrs. Kearney is Mrs. Kearney, and she wants the money for her daughter, and I really think that the tensions in relationships come out when there's extra stress on it.
Yeah.
And that's when it becomes apparent that she's not cooperating.
Yeah. Yeah.
And not only that, but as Mr. O'Madden Burke says, that's the end of her daughter's music career in Dublin, because her mother just destroyed it, even if she's really talented,
Yeah.
which I assume is probably true.
Oh yeah, yeah. Small town, no one will risk, no one will take a chance with them, Like you couldn't put on anything with people. You have to rely, on what is essentially a social arrangement.
hmm
Sort of say, well, look, here we are. This is how much is in the kitty, and there are 6 of us, so we'll divide it up 1/6 each, and
Yeah.
we'll catch you again with the next one.
Yeah, hopefully our next one will be good, and then we can.
And it may go the other way next time, but it's in the nature of a joint adventure rather than a joint social adventure rather than a contract. So.
hmm
And my notes kind of indicate that too. It says tradition is against Mrs. Kearney with regard to productions of this quasi-amateur sort. So
Yeah.
Sorry, being a latecomer to the discussion, did anybody maybe draw parallels between the mother and the boarding house?
No.
Okay, because of course we in both we have a fairly strong-minded woman about whom the reader has some ambivalence.
Yeah.
We respect strength and so on and so forth, and yet so I mean that's a pro, but the con is it's in both cases it's in our view misused.
Yeah. That's actually very good. I hadn't seen the parallel there in the 2 stories. Fantastic.
Well,
I think the difference between Mrs. Mooney and Mrs. Carney is that Mrs. Mooney is in complete control of everything around her.
Yes.
Because she's in the boarding house and she's complete control, and she achieves exactly what she wanted to do.
Yeah.
Mrs. Carney is in control when she's in her house. And it says somewhere there she does most of the work, and she gives Holohan tea and biscuits. But when she leaves, when she goes into the world that they inhabit, has no control at all. I think and she doesn't achieve what she wanted to do. So I think there's a big difference between.
That's a
good point.
Huge difference. There's a huge difference.
That's good. Agreed.
As Duncan said, just paraphrase there, Duncan, her vocabulary no longer works when she's out in the world.
Yeah.
She hasn't got the business. She's got a few words of business, what sounds like business vocabulary to her, but it doesn't work like that in reality.
Right.
Well, she's got a cooperative husband. In the case of Mrs. Kearney, her husband goes along. It's kind of like, okay, dear, whatever.
He's a model husband.
Model husband, model daughter. I mean, she is the ruler of the house, and she moves everything around. The other in the boarding house story, the interesting contrast is that woman really knows how society works.
Yeah.
Right.
Mrs. Kearney's just guessing at how she thinks it works and tries to play her cards that way. The boarding house mother, she knows how it works, and she knows all the little details of how to move things just so to get what she wants.
Yeah.
Well, Mrs. Kearney, it just blows up in her face.
Yeah, she's only got she's got a 1-barreled shotgun, That's how she's fired that nothing left to fire. Whereas the other woman has, you could marry Polly, and it could work out very well because all you go is talk to her mother and she'll sort Polly out for you if you have any problems. But you couldn't deal with Mrs. Carney in a month of Sundays, like.
The other thing too is Um, it's more, and Tom, I'm just kind of picking up on your points here.
Yeah.
It's more sort of concrete in the
Mm.
mother that things
Yeah.
aren't working out for her. That in fact, her strength in the end works against her because her daughter's not going to get any more gigs in Dublin.
Mm-hmm.
You could argue with the boarding house that in fact the Mrs. Mooney does not achieve her long range goals because she ends up with Bob Doran, and there are all kinds of hints in the boarding house that this guy, like he's I think he's good 9/10 of the time, but there's that other 1/10 where he's not. And when we see him in Ulysses, he's as drunk as a skunk, and we hear tales that he's sharing a room with a couple of shawls, and there's spilling wine, and the women are stealing from his wallet and so forth. So I'm not sure how well Mrs. Mooney actually did in getting the kind of husband for her daughter that she thought she was getting.
I don't, open to correction, Dave, I don't think it's Bob Doran that's with the shawls.
I think it is. You know what?
Check that.
Keep talking. It's in the Circe chapter, right? No, not Circe. It's in the one-eyed guy, Polyphemus chapter.
Cyclops,
yeah.
Keep talking. Let me see if I can find it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's good point. Good point all the same.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find that, Joe.
I found the details in the story A Mother to be absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. It's a fantastic story. It's so succinct, and the way he describes everybody in it, and it's fabulous. Yeah.
Well, just every little, I mean, sometime if I find people who ever want to do this sort of thing, I would love to go comb through a story like this and look at all the little details, like this thing here. As she was naturally pale and unbending in manner, she made few friends at school. Then we go down and it says, she gave them no encouragement, trying to console her romantic desires by eating a great deal of Turkish delight.
Yeah.
I mean, this story is just loaded with all these little tiny details. Hi, Orla. Which are when I was at university, my thing, I was a sociology major, and I loved the field of what's called social interaction, which would go into all the details of how things happen and where you get the clues of what's going on. And this story is just like perfect. A lot of them are that way, but for some reason, this story in particular just really hit me.
The other thing, just one other little thing about Kathleen's friend, and Joyce gives the name of Healy to her. The friend has visited Kathleen on numerous occasions, but Healy was the one of the leaders of I think he was an MP himself, that led the rebellion against Parnell, and he became, and of course Joyce then wrote Et tu Healy when he was a young chap. But Joyce gives the name Healy to this friend, and she leaves. She's with the group. It says she doesn't want to leave the group, but in the end she leaves the group and goes out and plays. So she kind of betrays them in that sense. She goes and plays as the accompanist for the rest of the concert.
Oh yeah.
So it's kind of
yeah, that's excellent. Boy, Tom, that's really good.
So
Not
he
only that,
a lot of things in the story. He's doing a lot of things. Yeah.
Dave, apologize for you there. You're right. You're right. It is Bob. I just looked it up.
Yeah, I just found it too. Yeah.
I was going to say, I thought it was Paddy Leonard, but it was Paddy Leonard knew the Bobby.
Exactly.
That's it. Yeah. Good stuff.
Okay, yeah, I just found it too. So I guess the point I was simply trying to make was both these mothers in the end are like strong women, but their strength works against them because they're ineffectual really in reaching what their goals are, you know?
Yeah.
Well, and would you like to point out to me the characters in all of Dubliners who reach what their real goals are?
Any goal.
Good point. Very good point.
Great. You know that exam question you got compare and contrast. Compare and contrast the mother in this story with the mother in that story. You know, they're fantastic stuff.
I guess in Corley and Lenihan, I guess they kind of reached their goals in Two Gallants. Despicable as that goal.
Oh, the gold coin.
Yes, exactly. You know, so I mean, just to piggyback on your point, I think the issue here is even when they reach their goals, it leaves the reader feeling quite empty.
Yeah.
Well, I've been reading a lot of Dante and doing a lot of heavy analysis. Of course, I'm just a mere novice in all of it. But in Dante, basically the thing is that from the outside, from the social point of view, he's not successful.
Yeah.
But he is successful because he obtains the inner goal that he's after. And I think this is the thing that I'm reaching too far here probably, but in all of these characters, which is kind of like life, we really don't reach our goals if our goals are outside of us. Whether it's the right marriage or success in business or respect from the community, all these kinds of things. That in the final analysis, the only goals which we can ever really reach are the goals inside, kind of the spiritual goals. And that as long as we're judging ourselves by something that happens in the outside world, we're bound to be disappointed. As you know, and once again, I come back to Dante. And Dante, he was still in exile. He could never go back to his home city. He did have a sponsor in Ravenna and all that, but and then he went off and kind of died a miserable death away from home. But he reached his spiritual goal, assuming I mean, the Divine Comedy is so good, in my opinion, that I would say he reached his spiritual goals. So this is always, anyway, I'm rambling on now.
Yeah, it's a bit like that saying that all political careers end in failure. You know, and you depends on what you mean by failure, obviously. But it's similar, parallel to that.
What does Beckett says, fail better.
Fail better.
Yeah.
Fail smarter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking at what you had said though about Miss Healy, because that Miss Healy thing.
Yeah.
The page just before the last page, it says, quote, then she appealed to Miss Healy. Miss Healy wanted to join the other group, but she did not like to do so because she was a great friend of Kathleen's and the Kearneys had often invited her to her house. And then less than 100 words later, where is that thing? I saw it. Yeah, it's almost to me. Oh, but okay, less, and just a very few words later, it goes, but Miss Healy had kindly consented to play one or two accompaniments.
Yeah.
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 Exactly.
which means that she's probably not going to be a friend of Kathleen's anymore, and she certainly
No.
won't be invited to the house again.
No.
So Miss Healy makes some sort of social evaluation here and decides, I better go play the piano.
Doesn't Molly Bloom make some disparaging remark about Kathleen Kearney somewhere? So ring a bell.
Yeah, said something like
Sparrow
and those screechers or something. Yeah,
it was like Kathleen Kearney.
Yeah.
Mm.
But it just reminded me there in the story too. There's a great line. I think it's from Kathleen when the old soprano passes by, and she says, "I wonder where did they dig her up from?" You know.
Yeah.
It's the kind of thing that the Irish would say, like, you know, where did they dig you up from? Yeah.
Dublin plays, yeah.
Oh, it's a lot wider spread than Ireland, I assure you.
Yeah.
I love the guy who says use.
Yeah.
Yes.
Marker.
So in American English, to refer to someone as an artiste is most of the time done as a joke.
Right.
And as a put down. Is it the same in Dublin if you refer to someone as an artiste?
No. Don't know.
I think they were talking about French people.
Yeah.
And especially in music, people are artistes, but I don't think it's cynical, or I think it's I think a lot of people aspire to the condition of artist or artiste. So it would be a compliment, perhaps, on this side of the pond.
Okay. Well, Joe says he doesn't know, and you say you think it's a compliment, and so I'm going to say
I would lean towards what Arlo is saying, that it's kind of almost you're a good artist, and they call you an artiste. You know, that sort of.
I've never heard it used in a derogatory way.
I'm not sure.
What did you say, Donna?
I'm sorry, I just said, sorry for cutting across you, Joe. I just said I've never heard it used as a derogatory term.
Really? Okay, so let me.
I'd be inclined to go along with what Orla's saying. Yeah.
Right.
A piss
fellow
artist
Americans
would be derogatory.
Yes. A urine artist.
Portrait of an artist.
Someone, the right piss artist.
Yeah, that's definitely derogatory.
But I don't know if they'd use that in the context of the art world at all. That would be just somebody who would be in a bar telling tall tales.
The messer.
Yeah.
So other fellow Americans here among the readership, am I overstating it? Or is it just unique? Am I in some subculture of America where most of the time to use the word artiste is either a joke or a put down?
I think you're on the right track. I think it's also used to indicate that this person who is the artiste is really putting on airs, wants to be better than he is, and probably has no talent at all or very little, but considers himself an artiste. So if you're going to put down somebody who's an artist who you think has no talent, you might put your nose in the air and say, oh, he's an artiste.
Yeah. Yes, pretentious.
Yes.
Okay.
There's another phrase that they used to use, throwing shapes, you know. That was a good one as well.
That's a great phrase, Tom.
Yeah.
Notions.
Throwing shapes, yeah.
Sorry, I've lost my train of thought. You were saying throwing shapes. No, what they say is if people have notions, and where do they think they come from? Is what they say. But in no, I've forgotten what I was saying, so it must be a lie. Okay.
Maybe what you were thinking of, Orla, was it's a
circles back around,
Orla.
It's a good question because the word plays a fairly prominent role in the boarding house again. It's mentioned a number of times. Artiste. She put up or boarded artistes from the music halls occasionally.
Not derogatory.
Okay.
No, I
Okay.
remembered. It's that film that was made in America with about the very rich woman who couldn't sing.
Oh,
With
no.
Bird Street.
Foster Jennings. Is that Florence Foster?
Yeah, I think. Yes,
Does it have
I
Bird
think
Street in it?
yes,
She
and
she
I
got
think maybe she's an artiste.
yeah.
Well, you remember in the Mozart movie, God, what's that Mozart movie? Milos Forman's thing of the artiste and the emperor.
Amadeus.
Yes, yeah.
Amadeus. Okay, you
Yes.
remember the scene where the emperor wanted one of his lovers to sing the major role in the opera and uh, forced Mozart to include her in the opera, and that's when Mozart put her in the role. No, I'm going to anyway. Those things do happen.
Mm.
The mafia boss that wants his girlfriend to be on Broadway, the emperor who wants his
Citizen
lover.
Kane and Susan Alexander.
Yes, that's a very good one. Yes. Tom, just to follow up on your point, it's in. I'm just looking for it here. It's actually in Penelope, where
Okay.
Mrs. Kearney is mentioned, and it is, as you said, Kathleen Kearney and her lot of squealers.
Yeah, squealers, yeah.
Yeah.
I looked artist and artiste up in the dictionary, and they give them equal value. Says artist is one who pursues a pictorial art, especially a painter, also artiste. And then it goes on to say a performer and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Okay. In my English anyway, if I wanted to use it in that form, I would say she's a real artiste.
Mm.
Where I would be using artiste as a compliment.
Compliment.
But
Yeah, I
I
would
can
too.
also turn it just slightly, drop the real.
She thinks she's a friggin' artiste.
There you go. Lois, there we go. So, Orla and Dave, I think you came on after, I believe it was Joe and Tom were explaining that this situation happened to Joyce,
Oh, okay.
where he was in a concert and the accompanist walked out right when he was supposed to go on stage. So I thought that was a good little bit of information there.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to bring up one more little thing here that I thought was particularly brilliant when Mrs. Kearney is talking about her husband. And this is about the second or third page in, where she said she respected her husband in the same way as she respected the General Post Office
Post office. Yeah.
as something large, secure, and fixed. And he does play that role when she's complaining to him and he says, "Perhaps I should go with you to the concert tonight."
Yeah, she appreciated his abstract value as a male.
Yes.
She sure knows how to flatter a guy, doesn't she?
Yeah, you just appear right, you go with a huge gorilla, sort of this will impress them, this'll get my way with this, guy who can't speak.
And the other line there somewhere is that she just, if there were someplace, she'd just raise an eyebrow and then they would leave,
Yes, the signaling when they, yes. Yeah. Well,
He's the one of the, or maybe the only one of the characters in the husbands in Dubliners that is sober and very kind of steadfast and polite and that,
He's doing the 9 Fridays at Mass.
Yeah.
He's reliable.
Yeah.
What they would call in England sound. Could I just mention there the reference to the Academy, which is the Royal Irish Academy of Music in Westland Row, which still exists. In fact, I was there just a couple of months ago now. I presume it has been completely renovated since Joyce's time, but it's a wonderful theatre, and you have no expectation of finding a theatre there. It's just another house on the street, and a minute you go in, you have this wonderful theatre.
Where is West Monroe in connection with Dublin, direction-wise?
Okay, if you're going up Western Row with on your left-hand side, and if you were to go to the top, you'd see Sweeney's across the road from you. So it's on the left-hand side, right on the corner, the first house there, opposite Kennedy's.
Thank you. We just had a tour of that area, thanks to Joe.
Oh, very good.
Yeah, it was great.
I'm sure Joe mentioned it. Well, Kennedy's, of course, is the reference point.
Yes.
Well, Kennedy's may well be the center of the universe.
It may indeed.
All things, everything else circles Kennedy's.
It's Sweeney's office, right?
Yeah. Far out there.
Yep.
And there's America, and then there's the moon, and they all circle Kennedy's.
Maybe it's a thing about public houses in Dublin that, sorry, Orla, please go ahead.
No, you go ahead. You're on public houses. I was going to bring down the tone.
I was just thinking about the comment about Kennedy's being the center of the universe. I think every public house is the center of the universe, so they're probably parallel universes.
Center of the universe for some.
I was just going to say something that we talked about during Finnegan's Wake. Opposite Sweeney is Oriel House. And Oriel House was the headquarters of, and I can't remember what type of police they were. This was during the Civil War. And when people were brought in there, if they were spotted being brought in there, when people came to look for them, they were told to go look for them in the morgue. It was considered such a frightening place to be brought into, and that's directly opposite Sweeney's. Subsequently, it became like the Department of Agriculture or something, but it was called Oriel House. And if you come out the door of Sweeney, you're staring right at it. Can't remember the name, but we've been going through a decade of centenaries, so they keep talking about all these places and all these things that happened. So there's an undercurrent in a lot of later Joyce about what's happening in those places. Well, I don't know if there's an undercurrent, but there's allusions like to this place or that place, and so there's other histories as well as drinking and having fun.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Told you I'd bring down the tone.
That's actually an interesting. Yeah, that's all right. I actually appreciate that because, there undoubtedly were a number of places like that where they would pick up suspects and the suspects would never come out standing again.
Mm.
In New York City, we have a jail, which is the remnants of a jail from the 19th century that was then and is still referred to as the Tombs.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine it has a similar history.
Mm-hmm.
I thought Oriel House was now owned by Trinity College. Open to correction on that. Someone told me that.
It might be now,
Yeah.
but after it was, I don't remember what they were called, that version of police.
Yeah, the constabulary barracks, I think it was known as. Yeah.
Was that RIC?
No, after that, it became something else, something more. It was like secret police who go picking up people and disappearing them.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Stasi.
Yeah, or
Um,
Argentina.
Yeah.
And
I
then it
thought,
became a Department of Agriculture, and then it was possibly bought by Trinity because Trinity is buying everything.
Trinity is buying everything there. There's an online. It's in among their list of properties in Western Row. They're buying everything. They own the left-hand side of the street as you look at the Sweeney's already, and have built
All the way down.
all the way down, and they're working the other side now. So they'll be coming to the church soon. Well, I suppose the music academy is there. So, but it's a huge building, huge red brick building.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for the extras informations about this story. It's very interesting. Let me just take a little quick straw poll, if just to see. I think I'm going to just spend some time. Why I picked this particular story, I don't know, but I think I'm going to do a deep analysis on this story, the particular phrases, just these little things about Turkish delight and all these little. As she was naturally pale and unbending in manner, she made few friends at school. And then the thing about her getting, she sat amid the chilly circle of her accomplishments.
Yeah.
Wonderful sentence.
Yeah.
There's so many of these. I don't know why in this particular story it struck me, and it's probably just because I've been dense to it in other stories. But I think I'm literally going to go through and just start
Yeah.
pulling out some of these nuggets and looking at it.
Yeah.
And I guess where I was going was checking to see the straw poll if anybody here would be interested in some future time of having just a little separate Zoom conversation going over a story in that manner of just pulling stuff out and looking at how they function within the story.
Mm.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. So
Yeah.
I will work on that. Of course, you're all welcome to work on it too. I think I'll concentrate on the mother and just kind of do a little notebook of things. And then after I spend some time on that, if I go, yeah, okay, that sounds like it might work, then I'll just set up a thing and say, hey, I want to do this if you're interested in participating in this. Let me know, and then we would just do kind of a side meeting.
Sure.
Okay.
Can I just go back there to Oriel House? I've just found a note on it. It says it is a building at the intersection of Western Row and Fenian Street in Dublin. It is owned by Trinity College Dublin and serves as the headquarters for Connect, the Centre for Future Networks and Communications, Science Foundation Ireland-sponsored research centre.
Yeah.
Doesn't give any further background on it, I'm afraid.
Okay, doesn't go into the darker side, the darker history.
No.
Hang on, say nothing. Oriel House was the address at which a US pneumatic tire patent was drafted in 1893 for the wheels of velocipedes and other vehicles. The house served as headquarters for the Dunlop Pneumatic Tyre Company, for which it was known as the Dunlop Oriel House. During the Irish Civil War, it became the base for Criminal Investigations Department, CID, of the Irish Free State.
Yeah.
Separate from An Garda Síochána, the National Police Force. So
Okay.
you're on the ball, Orla, CID.
No.
Michael Portillo Tio, I don't know how to pronounce his name. I think he was talking about the head of it during the Civil War was somebody called McGrath. And he had a fearsome reputation. And then after he decided to give it all up, and he founded the National Sweepstakes, and he made an absolute fortune.
Oh.
So that was sort of like the lottery.
Wow.
Yeah. So you're saying this guy went from setting up kind of a secret police to eventually setting up the national lottery?
Well, it was called the Sweepstakes. It was very famous at the time.
The Irish sweepstakes. Yeah,
Yeah,
actually it was famous worldwide. We talked about the Irish sweepstakes in the United States.
Right.
And how that was the one to get a ticket to if you wanted to make some real money.
Yeah.
Well, I think the thing was they sold them abroad. They weren't
Yeah.
meant to, but they did.
And the numbers were drawn by nurses. This famous shot of the nurse with.
Okay.
But the joke at the time was that the Catholic Church were promoting the sweepstake as priests on their vestments would have IHS, which people thought stood for Irish Hospital Sweepstakes, which of course
It seems that a nefarious career with the secret police is a good springboard to future prosperity, as we see with the current leader of Russia.
Indeed.
Yeah.
You know,
And McGrath owned horses, didn't they? The McGraths.
That's the McGrath family, yeah.
Yeah. And they run the sweepstake.
Oh, there you go.
No conflict of interest there at all,
No, none whatsoever.
Well, yeah, because they had nurses drawing the tickets, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And everybody knows that nurses are
You can rely on
honorable and have pure hearts.
Yeah.
And they were in uniform.
And
How
they're
did the sweepstake come to an end? Wasn't there a problem with the sweepstake at the end of it? Wasn't there something?
I can't remember what happened to it, but I'm
Something
going to
happened,
check it out
right?
for you while you're talking.
Look, I mean, they did get a lot of funding of hospitals and went in, came from that. But something happened. There was some bit of.
I'm sure there was a scandal.
Yeah. I just can't remember. We had so many scandals around that time. I don't know which one. But and then it was put on a standard world lottery, state lottery basis, like all states have. Prior to that was private enterprise.
Is that what like when McGraw first set it up? It was kind of a private organization.
Private enterprise, the McGraths, and
Oh, God.
The main organizers were Richard Duggan, Captain Spencer Freeman, and Joe McGrath.
Yeah,
Duggan was a well-known bookmaker.
Yeah, background in the secret police will help,
Indeed.
It would, yes.
The ratio of winnings and charitable contributions to sweepstake revenues proved low, and the scheme made its founders very rich. Sweepstake administrators wielded substantial political influence, allowing the scheme to flourish before it was finally wound up in the 80s. They don't say why.
Yeah. I kind of remember in my childhood hearing of wild.
It said from the 1960s.
Stephen Square, Marion Square, all connected with the McGraths,
It says here, Joe, from the 60s onwards, revenues declined.
Yeah.
The offices were removed to Lottamore House in Cork. Although giving the appearance of a public charitable lottery, with nurses featured prominently in the advertisings and drawings. The sweepstake was, in fact, a private for-profit lottery company, and the owners were paid substantial dividends from the profit.
Yeah, it's fantastic stuff.
And of course, the government created the new Irish lottery in 1986.
Mm.
Right. Oh.
Final sweepstake was held in January 1986, and the company was unsuccessful in a license bid for the Irish National Lottery, and it went into liquidation the following year.
Yeah.
No mention of a scandal, though, but I'm sure there was one behind the scenes somewhere.
There was some chicanery that I can't remember what it was. Like, at the scale of things, I don't think it was as large as later chicanery, but it didn't look good.
Here's a little interesting fact. A collection of advertising material relating to the Irish Hospital sweepstakes is among the special collections of the National Irish Visual Arts Library. You can go and visit that the next time you're in town or wherever it is.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I remember one stage the police. This was, I was about 14 years of age, and we had a state shipping company called Irish Shipping Limited, which was, ocean-going vessels. As a result of the Atlantic War, and we were starving and all this sort of thing, they were going to have ships. So they were chartered out around the world, and something happened, because that was how a lot of the tickets got into America, you see. And I think it was the police in Dublin, on a tip-off from the FBI, raided a ship called the Irish Plane, which was one of these ocean-going ships, and they found a whole stock of tickets ready for shipment to America, and they seized them, you see, and they arrested the ship. Now, this represented a huge set of contradictions, because the state had now arrested itself, And Irish Shipping were quite happy to have their ship locked up. They could care less, because they had to keep these ships working in peacetime, and it was, like, it was all business. And and then the Irish sweepstake was bringing in money to fund hospitals, and and it all just petered out. There was never any court cases. I remember it at the time. It was really, because they showed a photograph on the newspaper, just of the porthole of a ship, the window of a ship open. It's implied the money was stuffed in there, the tickets were stuffed in there. But it was kind of ironic that the state, one branch of the state, gets the notice to raid and arrest another branch of the state.
The United States Customs apparently outlawed the lottery back in 1890.
Yeah.
And so it essentially, in the UK and the US, it was a black market operation.
It was, yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Because it was really the mafia that opened up gambling in Nevada, and they did it directly. They just paid off the politicians.
Yeah.
They corrupted the whole state of Nevada to get what they wanted. And then they built these, glitzy, paradises in the desert.
Yeah.
The Corleones.
But tourists used to buy, American tourists used to buy lottery tickets here as part of their vacation.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there was nothing wrong with that, They linked the ticket with a relation in Ireland. Anyways,
thank you all very, very much. I think let's wind it up here. This has been an informative and wide-ranging discussion here.
I take it, Duncan, that I got the timing completely wrong tonight. We're obviously an hour earlier, are we?
Yes, you would start at 6 o'clock.
6 o'clock. I'll be on time next week.
For next week and the week after.
Okay.
After the 30th, I think, or the 31st is when you change. And then Yeah.
Easter Sunday, it goes back. We go back to the normal time, and there was the normal time difference between us.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
so
Ireland-
next week is the bank holiday in Ireland for all of you in Ireland. So we'll be able to make it at 6. I
Okay.
don't think I might be able to make it after that. I mightn't be home from work in time.
Okay. But
Could you be on the bus?
it's just for these 3 weeks, and then we're back to the normal.
In sailing.
Okay.
I was wondering what the talk was. I was going, where are we?
Yeah, we were high at that stage.
I will say compared to last year, I remember last year where I had to run 2 meetings.
That's right.
Because like
right.
half the people showed up at the
That's
end
right.
of the hour. I thought, oh, well, I've got time. I'm
Do it
just gonna
again.
begin.
I'm glad to hear I wasn't the only one. So
No, we're fine. Okay, so next week we
Okay.
will
Bye.
Thanks,
continue
everybody.
what we-
See you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Bye. Thanks, Don. Yeah. Bye.
Oh, dear.